Boris Johnson loses control of the Tory party, a government minister admits that the new tier restrictions are wrong, and the BBC becomes a mouthpiece for the Iranian government. Hello everyone and welcome to the first video of the day. At the time of me making this video, the vote in Parliament for the tier restrictions hasn't actually happened yet. So by the time you're watching this, it's probably finished. It's highly likely that the government had won that vote despite the Tory rebellion. But Boris Johnson and the leadership are losing control of not just Parliament but his own Tory party. This morning we had the Environment Secretary George Eustace on Julia Hartley-Brewer's show on Talk Radio, accidentally admitting that the new restrictions are they're not consistent, but they're also not fair.
Yes, well, the measures we're taking are all about trying to break the cycle of infection. And that doesn't mean that every rule that we introduce and every requirement we put on people is perfectly consistent or might even be considered perfectly fair. Indeed, they won't be. But what we're trying to do overall...
Am I just right that you, as a cabinet minister, have just said to me that you confirmed that, yes, the rules are not consistent and not fair?
The rules are intended to basically reduce the...
but they're not consistent and not fair.
There are... Look, these are draconian emergency measures. And so there's always going to be things you can point to that say, well, that's not entirely consistent.
Well, clearly this isn't a good look for the government, considering we've had a number of top MPs, for example, David Davis, coming out against the government. He basically stood up today in Parliament saying that there is a difference between science and an opinion of a single scientist. And that's a fair point. That applies both sides, by the way, but an opinion of a scientist doesn't mean that's science. The facts don't work that way. We even had Angela Leadsom. She used to be Secretary of State. She was also stood against Theresa May for the Tory leadership. And she also said that people are fed up. They've had enough. And as of Wednesday, as of tomorrow, when the national lockdown finishes, more people are going to refuse to comply with the restrictions regardless of what they are. We've even had Sir Graham Brady, one of the loyal MPs, and despite the fact that he's very sound and he's been rebelling recently, but he's been a loyal supporter. He's a very nice and polite man. He also stood up and said that he no longer can support Boris Johnson's policies. It's not just that. Tory donors, people who have been supporting the Conservative Party, are also coming out against Boris Johnson.
I think sometimes that these politicians live in another world. You know, they live in something of an ivory tower. And if they would get out and about, if Boris would actually get out and about and meet the people who have lost and are losing their livelihoods, their businesses, the way to support their families because of these restrictions. You know, people in hospitality are seeing their businesses shut down with people put out of work all across the country. And he needs to meet some of those people and see how his measures are destroying those lives and balance that against the very limited good that he is seeing. Some of these businesses that will unfortunately fail if the restrictions continue, they will not reopen, possibly ever.
Things have gone so bad for the government that the first thing we heard was that apparently Boris Johnson, for the first time in ages, he actually attended the tea rooms to mingle with the Tory MPs, socially distanced, to have a chat with them, just a catch up. But also, this came out that as Tory MPs raised concerns in the chamber ahead of tonight's vote, Conservative MPs have now been invited to a Zoom meeting where the Chief Whip will host this meeting with the Prime Minister at 6 p.m. tonight. So again, at the time of me uploading this video, that meeting is probably finished now. Regardless of the result, the whole situation is that the government are losing control of the whole situation, and it's not really looking good. It's not just about the Tories, by the way. So this is not some sort of just anti-Tory video. They're all in a mess. It's the whole situation across the country. Wales, controlled by the Labour Party, they've banned alcohol from 6 p.m. A couple of months ago, they banned books because they're not essential items. Now they're banning alcohol. 6 p.m. curfew for pubs. So the sale of alcohol will be banned in pubs and restaurants. 6 p.m. hospitality curfew. Everything else, cinemas and bowling alleys, will be closed too. This obviously came out a couple of days ago, but the whole point of this is to show the hypocrisy of the Labour leadership. The opposition party today in Parliament stood up and said that they don't support Boris Johnson's policies, the lockdown policies, but then they said, we want lockdown policies. We don't support Boris's policies, so we're going to abstain. They're not even voting for or against it, which is an astonishing thing. It's not just about Sir Keir Starmer. Sadiq Khan in London has been so inconsistent. The guy who came out at the beginning of this whole thing saying that, oh, the London Tube is the safest place, there won't be any new cases coming from there. He then said we should have a 10 p.m. curfew. He then said we should cancel the 10 p.m. curfew. He's now saying that we should have a later curfew than even 11 p.m. Don't know what's going on with the Labour Party, but it's a very, very bad look. The Conservatives, going back to the Tory party, especially the new MPs, the new intake, have come out to form a new group, a new backbench group for the 2019 intake. This is not, generally speaking, a rebellious group. It's essentially there to represent them, like some sort of American caucus sort of thing, which is because the leadership and management of the Tory party have been so poor recently that they don't feel like that they've been represented by the leadership. So the 109 new MPs that were elected back in 2019 are now forming this new caucus, and it will be very similar to the ERG, the European Research Group, for the pro-Brexiteer MPs, but also for the lefties One Nation caucus as well. So they're going to have their own group, which is, I don't know how I feel about this. I understand that the new MPs need to be represented, but the Conservatives already have a 1922 backbench committee, and that's there to represent the backbenchers. And I know that new and younger MPs are new and young, but at the same time, if you want to play with the big boys, then just play with the big boys instead of doing this. I really want to know what the purpose of this is, and but again, this goes back to the party chairman and the party leader. They're supposed to be keeping these guys happy to avoid these weird caucuses. So let's see if this actually becomes a successful thing, but I highly doubt that. Now, in other news, Boris Johnson is actually doing something good. Today, they've published a new legislation to abolish the Fixed Term Parliament Act. Thank God for that. David Cameron and George Osborne introduced the Fixed Term Parliament Act, where every 5 years we're going to have a fixed term elections. And that was to protect the coalition government because of the economic crisis that we had. It was to protect the stability of government, but then they forgot to actually abolish it. So it's been going on for years and years now, and about a decade basically. So Boris Johnson is doing something good. They are going to be getting rid of this Fixed Term Parliament Act, which is an interesting timing, because that means there could be an election called if there is a leadership challenge, or if there's some sort of opposition move against the government. It's a lot easier now to call an election than before. So it's a big risky move, but I support this move. Thank you, Boris. Now, the BBC. This is interesting. They're supposed to be holding the government to account with the restrictions and everything else. No. They're too busy becoming an accidental mouthpiece for the Iranian regime. They brought this guest, this independent expert on Iran, Dr. Trita Parsi, as a guest to talk about Iran. Watch this clip.
Joining us is Dr. Trita Parsi, an Iran expert and executive vice president of the non-partisan think tank, the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statescraft. Dr. Parsi, it's good to have you with us.
Well, that's interesting. Independent expert. Well, thanks to Guido Fawkes. Apparently, it's not that difficult to Google his name to find all this information, but Guido published this saying that the court found in 2012 that the works of Parsi was not inconsistent with the idea that he was, first and foremost, an advocate for the Iranian regime. He's been publicly advocating for the Iranian government for years and years. He's been anti-Israel, he's been critical of our policies, and he's been invited a number of times by BBC researchers to go on the channel as an independent expert. And so this is a problem. BBC researchers need to do their job properly, not like this. And the problem with the BBC is that if the Iranians watching this, you know what I mean, because there's a BBC Persian channel, and they have been consistently against the freedom fighters and also the West, up to a point where there are a lot of memes and books about this, how they call the BBC the Persian service. and how it's actually supporting the Iranian regime. There are a lot of memes about the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, being one of the presenters on the BBC. So BBC Persian is actually a propaganda machine that's, whether intentionally or unintentionally, always taking the side of the Iranian government. So taxpayers' money, British taxpayers' money, are funding a channel that is not only is not balanced and impartial, it's actually taking the side of our enemies. Well done, BBC. Hashtag defund the BBC. So this is the latest update I have for you guys. In the next video at 8 p.m, I'm going to give you the latest on the Brexit trade talks, because things are escalating on that front. So make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. And if you do believe in Britain, don't forget to get your latest I Believe in Britain merchandise. The link is in the description. As it's getting cold, the winter's coming, get your hoodies. It's the silent majority, 52%. And if you're a member of the channel, you get a special discount as usual. I've posted it on the community tab on my channel. Thanks again for watching. I'm Tousi, and I'll see you guys in the next video.